We return to our focus to emerging markets and the problems that they face. South Africa's economy is in recession, inflation is rising, and so is unemployment. So how are ordinary South Africans affected? Nicolaus Bauer is in Constitutional Hill to get some answers. He joins us now live. Nicolaus, I mean, this is a loaded question. When South Africans are facing so many challenges and their pockets are stretched to the limit, is there any good news for us on the horizon?
Well, from a consumer point of view, you would argue that there's not much good news on the horizon from that perspective. But we'll be chatting to economists later on in the afternoon about how the South African consumer is weathering the economic storm. We're here at the Constitutional Court to discuss the importance of the informal sector. The informal sector, in many ways, during an economic downturn, and especially during South Africa's post-democratic history, has been a mainstay of economic growth and also job opportunities. And we're at the Constitutional Court because it was the site of a groundbreaking judgment in 2013 about the rights of informal traders to sell their wares and services on the streets of Johannesburg. Now, the organization that spearheaded that court challenge was the Free Market Foundation, and we're joined by Louw from the Free Market Foundation this afternoon. Leon, thank you so much for your time. Jumping straight into it, how important is the informal sector, not only when there's an economic downturn, but generally speaking in an economy like South Africa's?
It's hotly contested and unknown amongst economists because by its nature it's unrecorded and unquantified and undocumented, and technically speaking it's neither informal nor a sector. It's formal and it's not a sector. It's technically illegal or criminalized. The chances are it's well above 8%, which is what the Stats SA estimates.
Oh, are we talking about 8% GDP, worth of GDP?
Not of the GDP, but on top of the GDP. In other words, the GDP understates the size of the economy by the size of the informal sector. Some economists, like Louw, for example, and others, recent researcher from the USA, think it puts it at perhaps as much as 20% or even 25%. In other words, all of the 40% or so people who are unemployed, over 50% of youth, over 65% of black youth, are in fact earning a living, eking it out in the shadow economy, this criminalized, illegal economy, which ought to be completely decriminalized and completely legal and respected and regarded as the wonderful thing it is, which is to create jobs and opportunities for people who would otherwise be destitute.
This is not completely unheard of in developed economies either. I did a bit of research and found that economists say that up to 24% of the Greek economy is an informal sector. Up to 21% of the Italian economy is also informal. And when it comes to jobs, there's also no way of exactly pinpointing how much employment the informal sector creates. But some are arguing that up to 2.5 million people, business owners, employees of small to medium enterprises in the informal sector enjoy employment in South Africa, up to 2.5 million.
Yes, that's quite realistic. Those estimates for first world countries like Greece and Italy and Spain and others probably suggest that we are higher than they are. In other words, we could be 25 or 30 or even 40%, some people estimate. If you do monetary circulation calculations, for example, like Professor Brian Cantor, then it looks like 30 or 40%. So yes, we are talking about a massive amount of employment creation, a massive amount of self-employment, but things like the minimum wage and the labour law render the employment that is created in this sector technically illegal and criminal. And so we have to change the law. If President Ramaphosa wants a stimulus package for South Africa, you start by leaving the informal and small business sector alone instead of oppressing them, which is now what is being done.
We're a bit pressed for time, but maybe in a nutshell, tell me, in your opinion, why we are faced with the opportunity to perhaps create more employment through the informal sector, but the legislative framework, it just simply doesn't give expression to this opportunity.
Yes, firstly, the informal sector is extremely easy and quick and flexible. It jumps around depending on, whether consumers are on this corner or that corner, whether they want burglar bars or cars fixed or whatever. And the law basically says that you have to operate from zoned premises, first world properties. They can't be residences. They must be formal town planning schemes. And there's a whole host, building codes, electricity code, labor codes, minimum standards, and so on. A host, a jungle, a tsunami of laws and regulations that make it, for practical purposes, impossible for decent, law-abiding, productive people to operate away from being harassed and bribed and blackmailed and attacked, sometimes very viciously. Not far from us here, a woman called Maria tried to hold back her basket of fruit that the police were taking, and they pulled it so hard they pulled her finger off. That gives you some idea of the viciousness and violence with which these decent, law-abiding, productive human beings who are asking for nothing other than their liberty are treated.
Well, that's the gospel of the informal sector, according to the Free Market Foundation. Now, let's bring in some of those people that are working at the coalface of this informal sector, the South African Council for Hawkers and Informal Traders, Livingston's Mantanga. Why do people work in the informal sector? Why are people forced into an employment of hawking, or perhaps choose informal trading as their way to make ends meet?
First of all, people have been coming to this sector because they were not forced, because they want to stand on their own. And secondly, the high rate of unemployment in this country have forced most of the people to come to the informal sector.
And what are the barriers to entry? I mean, is it just simply a case of someone waking up one day and deciding, all right, I'm going to sell fruit in a street corner. I'm going to, because that's the argument many people make in the economy, that you're undercutting formal traders. You're undercutting people selling fruit and vegetables from the local retailer like the Spar or the Pick and Pay.
That is the only reason that the government have never been looking at this sector, because those formal retailers are not employing more people, and there are a lot of people that need services, and our people are looking for those people who are looking for services.
And what about the government, or some people accusing informal traders of not paying their way? I mean, you're not paying tax. You don't necessarily. There's some informal traders we engage with in Johannesburg that pay for their spot on the street to sell their wares or their services. But what about people that quite literally just pop up on any street corner? They're not paying tax. They're not in the informal economy, and as such, not paying for the infrastructure that helps them deliver their services.
The maladministration of the city council is the one that is making informal sector to be look like a nuisance, because there is no regulation that regulate that when you want to start a business, what you have to do. Instead of progressing this, encouraging this business to go on by putting up regulation that are fitting for the sector, they are not doing that. They want to see this sector away.
So are you saying that informal traders and hawkers would gladly pay tax, gladly pay towards the running of the country if they were given legislation to make their processes legal?
We have been saying that this too long to the government before. In the apartheid government, we were prepared to pay because we are paying for licenses until we find that those licenses are the red tape that are stopping black people to come to the street. So after this democratic government, we were prepared to pay taxes when the environment is conducive for us to make money, because we are making a living. So we understand that if government are supporting us, we will support in return to the government.
And if government does nothing, I mean, are informal traders going to continue making a living this way?
If government cannot come to the party, this sector could not die today. Instead of dying, it will increase because of unemployment in this country.
Some food for thought there, Michelle. We live in very, very tenuous economic times. The informal sector in many ways could be South Africa's savior. But how do we harness the power of a sector that could increase GDP numbers and, of course, also provide some sort of employment to the people that need it the most?
Absolutely. Well, thanks very much for that. Nicholas Bauer joining us from Constitution Hill there as we focus on the challenges being faced by emerging economies. South Africa is, of course, one of a number of emerging economies we are focusing on.